region.
Is our next presenter. He's currently heading up the producer services for E2 Energy Services with over 25 years of experience in the Appalachian Basin. John has held roles as president of Big North Consulting and director of production for Rice Energy and Engineering, manager for CNX Gas. So he's currently involved with a specialty blend of midstream projects at E2 facilities, well site compression, and rich gas condensate conditioning. He's got a Bachelor's of Science in Petroleum Engineering with an MBA and has authored numerous publications for SPE, AAPG, and API. So, John, if you're ready, I guess we'll go ahead and just let you go.
So what I want to talk about a little bit is rich gas conditioning and essentially extracting NGLs from rich gas in the Utica and the Marcellus. And this presentation is going to go through some of the basics of doing that, as well as some details and complications of how difficult it is to do that in the Appalachian Basin versus other areas. I'll start out with kind of a brief description of the Utica and the Marcellus. And in the early days, we developed consortiums, and we looked at where we drilled wells. Wells were drilled as far west in the Utica as central Ohio. And what was able to be mapped out of that was essentially the BTU values of both the Marcellus and the Utica. And as the basins matured to the east, you got dry gas. As you went west in the more immature basin, especially in the Utica, you got liquids, you got rich gas, you got condensate. And if you went far enough west, you actually got oil production, and some of that was even heavy oil production. Same thing in the Marcellus. And so what this map defines through the years of exploration and development in the Utica and the Marcellus is the BTU values of the Marcellus and the Utica. And as you move, you can see a band of wet gas in the yellow in the Utica, and you can see an area in the Marcellus in the circle to the east of that. So they're really two separate regions that have wet gas and are abundant and rich with liquids. This is from EIA. And the shale gas production obviously has increased in the Utica and the Marcellus, specifically since 2010. And we've seen a dramatic increase in activity and production along with that. And we've also seen liquid production increase in the areas as well. In fact, the East has become one of the bigger oil producers in the United States now. And what's interesting, if you look at the difference between crude oil prices and natural gas prices, you see a lot of fluctuation. We've seen a lot of fluctuation in oil prices, same thing with gas prices. And, but NGLs tend to follow the oil price forecast better than the gas price forecast. So if you look at the NGL curve in the blue, which is Mont Belvieu NGLs, it typically follows the oil curve a lot closer, which is the orange curve at the top or the yellow curve at the top, rather than the natural gas price. Exports have also been increasing, and we've seen a steady rise in NGL exports over the last 5 years. And that also has impacted Utica and Marcellus production here. if you look at breaking these components down in ethane, butane, propane, this is what the price trends have done over about the last 2 years. And in fact, in April of 2020, it's interesting because the price of propane and butane actually was higher than the crude oil price. So it's interesting because there has been some changes in liquid pricing. It doesn't tend to fluctuate as much as crude oil pricing does. And we've also seen that there is kind of an ethane differential to this, where the price of ethane has changed. And initially, with early NGL production and fractionation in this area, ethane was a dramatic cost. And we'll get into why that's important here in a little bit. But ethane is probably one of the big factors in Marcellus and Utica gas in this area, much more so than even in some of the other areas of the United States. Moving forward here, we've seen NGL infrastructure in the area has evolved, and also we've seen new facilities, we've seen new pipelines being built. So along with interest in the wet gas production, we've also seen some increase in facilities in this area as well. So going back to essentially a typical gas stream from Utica or Marcellus, one of the things that is interesting in this area is we have a high content of ethane, and it's more gas related than oil related. And I'll explain that a little more in a few minutes. But essentially what you're doing is you're taking the natural gas, you're conditioning it, and you're separating out the liquids. As opposed to LNG, where you're trying to liquefy the natural gas to ship it as a liquid, you're just trying to extract the NGLs from natural gas. Obviously, you need high BTU gas because you need to have more propanes and butanes and heaviers in that gas to be able to extract the liquids. This is kind of a typical NGL processing chain. You would have obviously natural gas production either from oil or from natural gas, where it's rich gas. That would typically be processed at the field level to separate what could be separated at the field. Then it would go to a processing plant, then fractionation, where the ethane would be extracted. Storage is obviously an option, and we've seen some interest in storage for natural gas liquids in this area as well. And then the gas could potentially be liquefied and shipped out. The NGLs could be shipped out as exports, or go to something like the new ethane cracker that Shell is putting in, and allow other products to be made from those raw NGLs. So again, we've seen a dramatic increase in pipelines in this area, and a lot of it to do with liquids. So if you're a producer and you've got rich gas, you've got a couple of options. One option is you can put that gas in a wet gas pipeline, something that's higher typically than 1,100 BTU, sometimes higher than 1,000 BTUs, and move that gas and the liquids through that pipeline to a facility that will take the liquids out. Or you can process those liquids out and you can move your gas in a dry gas pipeline. And the Northeast is obviously full of dry gas pipelines. We do have some stranded gas that's wet, not a lot, but there is some stranded gas at the well site because it's higher BTU than what pipeline requirements are, and there's no facilities available to take that liquid out and get the gas down to a lower BTU. We've also seen an increase in this area for trucking liquids. And to truck NGLs, you can't truck them and you can't store them in atmospheric tanks. You have to move them in pressurized tanks. So we have seen some movement from that from other areas where trucking is now more available to move pressurized NGLs. And that's also helped with interest in the wet gas regions. Again, ethane, with the development of the Shell plant, that's going to add value to ethane. And previously, ethane was nothing more than a pure cost to extract from the natural gas. So you had to pay to get the ethane out of it. Now with the evolution of the cracker plants in the area, the need for the product, I think we're going to see the value of ethane increase as well. And that will also help the value of treating the natural gas in this area. So comparing natural gas with other regions, primarily, if you look at the Marcellus and the Utica and compare it with something like the Bakken, the Niobrara, or the Eagle Ford, the Bakken, the Niobrara, and the Eagle Ford are primarily oil-rich shale areas. So they have a lot more oil in the shale than the Utica and the Marcellus. The Utica and Marcellus are primarily gas plays. The Bakken, the Niobrara, and the Eagle Ford could be considered more primarily oil plays than gas plays. So why is that a big difference? Well, the difference is you see a lot heavier components in the resulting gas in the Bakken and the Niobrara and the Eagle Ford. And you don't see as much of the light component like ethane. So the Utica and the Marcellus are rich in ethane. And that's very important to understand if you're going to treat and process that gas. So in order to liquefy the natural gas, essentially what you're trying to do is lower the temperature of the so that the different components fall out of solution in the natural gas. And that's based on the vapor pressure of the products. So you can see in order to get butane out, you need a temperature around 70 degrees, which is the boiling point of butane. Actually, it's 31 degrees. I think that's in C. It is in C, my graph. So 31 degrees Fahrenheit. Propane takes about minus 44 to get out of the system. Ethane, you need a minus 128 degrees, which is the boiling point of ethane. So you need to get ethane much colder than propane and butane in order to get it and extract it out of the natural gas system. So one of the questions I'm often asked is liquefying natural gas a function of BTU? And the answer to that is no. And the reason for that is the BTU of the gas stream varies by what components are in the gas stream. So you can have a variety of components that increase the BTU, but as you can see, each individual component has a different pressure and temperature needed in order to extract that from the natural gas. So the primary concern in the Utica and the Marcellus is the amount of ethane that's in the Utica and the Marcellus. And that takes the coldest temperatures to extract it. In the past, people tried to bring up JT plants to take and liquefy 12 to 1300 BTU gas in the Utica and the Marcellus, and they were not successful doing that. And the reason for that is a JT plant cannot get the temperature down low enough. So what really needs to be used is either refrigeration or cryogenic technology with a turbo expander, which will allow you to get the temperatures cold enough to get the ethane out of the system and liquefy the ethane. So again, we're back to our comparison of natural gas. And again, we're looking at Marcellus, we're looking at average BTU values of about 1150 to 1300 in the wet region. And with the Utica, we're looking at very similar values, maybe slightly higher BTUs. And the primary piece of this is there's a lot of ethane in that high BTU of the gas. So some of the considerations that you want to look at when you're thinking about conditioning your wet gas is number one, applies to any treating facilities. Do you have wet gas pipelines available? And what's the cost to move the gas in the wet gas pipelines? Wet gas pipelines can cost as much as 40 to 90 cents an MCF, and you may not receive much value on the liquid extraction at the facilities. Y-grade liquid, which is a blend, it's the mix of all the NGLs. Typically it's called Y-grade propane or Y-grade liquids. They can add as much as 20 cents to $1 to the price of an MCF if you can extract those and move them to a fractionation facility, either from trucking or through pipeline. So compact equipment now can allow this to be done in a lot of places, even at the well pad. So you don't need a big, huge facility to extract the NGLs. You can do this with compact equipment. We've made equipment as small as 2 to 3 million a day facilities for 2 to 3 million cubic feet a day of gas, and up to as large as 40 to 60 million. Those are a small enough footprint that they can be put at or near an actual well pad. So that allows you to monetize the stranded wet gas at the sites, and the operators and mineral owners both benefit from that if you're able to put something small and compact out there to take out the NGLs and then move the gas to a dry gas pipeline. Typical Marcellus pad or Utica pad. This is a picture of one actually over in Ohio. And this is what one typically looks like. You may have to add compression, and compression also helps in the processing because you're able to maintain a higher pressure at the treating facility. So if you have pad compression, that also is a benefit to treating the NGLs at or near the site. There we go. So when you're looking at designing a project, this is about the size that you need for a typical Marcellus or Utica pad in order to put a facility out there. So you see, it's certainly doable to put small compact facilities at or near the well pads. Project design, very important. A lot of projects have been looked at here. Again, I mentioned operators have brought in JT plants that were unsuccessful extracting liquids. And that's mainly because they weren't able to get the gas to a cold enough temperature to get the ethane out of it. This is a typical project that we were involved in designing. The target BTU range was 1180 to 1260. It was in a undeveloped area, so it wasn't clear what the BTU range would be. So we looked at designing it on a high and a low range. The maximum design capacity was 40 million standard cubic feet a day. And we wanted to design the facility to handle about 5,000 barrels of NGLs. So we're looking at an initial rate of about 40 million a day. Plant discharge pressures around 550 to 600 pounds, and pipeline delivery around 250 to 500. So what's critical in the design is a simulation package. And a lot of people use the HYSYS model. There are other models out there that can be used as well. But typically what you're trying to do is look at different processing points in the system. You may only want to develop a Y-grade product, or you may want to take it further and take propane, put in a depropanizer and take propane out and sell the propane directly. In this particular design, it was designed for a Y-grade liquid, and we looked at about 44, roughly 44 gallons per minute of NGLs from this design, and about out of that 40 million a day, about 38 million cubic feet of gas. So these are the process steps in the simulation it takes to determine what you're going to get out of the design. And we looked at a range, a high and a low range. On 40 million, we went down as low, I think, as 36 million. We looked at the liquid. So depending on the BTU value that we encountered, whether it was the 1180 or the 1250, the modeling shows us we're going to make 1,500 to 2,450 barrels a day of Y-grade product, and will result in about 38 million cubic feet a day of 1,000 BTU gas that could be put into a dry gas pipeline. The modeling also shows the breakdown of components. So here's the 1500 model to the left, the 2450 on the right, and it shows the breakdown of ethanes, propanes, different butanes, and heaviers. And so that's what you're doing by simulating this, and that's a key component of the design, is to run the simulation. So you can estimate what you've got in the output for gas, what you've got for liquids, and that your actual process is going to reach cold enough temperatures and pressures, adequate pressures and temperatures to allow you to drop out that Y-grade product. Small plants can be built either using refrigeration or turbo expander. This is what they look like. They're relatively small in design. And final considerations, I think, for this would be to look at, number one, what do you want to achieve by gas conditioning. Number one, you're doing it because your gas is too high a BTU. You can't sell it into a dry gas pipeline. So do you have a liquid pipe? Do you have a wet gas pipeline to sell it into? Okay, yes. What's that cost? So now a good piece of this would be to look at doing the liquid model and simulation and determine how much liquids you can get out of that gas, forecast what you can sell the liquids for, and see if that's a more economic, a better economic solution than just putting all the gas into a wet gas pipeline and sending it to a larger fractionation facility. In doing that, you can sell the gas to a dry gas pipeline. We now have trucking capabilities in the area, and trucking companies are more than happy to come up here and move NGLs at this stage right now. The equipment doesn't have a large impact on site plans either. You're looking at about 100 to 200 foot space, plus a loadout facility for trucks. Storage can be used with vertical or horizontal tanks. So you have different room space requirements depending on what type of tank you want to use. And again, well site compression. If you install well site compression, that helps maintain pressure of the facility, and it allows you to continue to extract the liquids over the life of the well and pad. Design construction for a gas facility like this typically takes about 6 to 12 months. It's not like this equipment is readily available out there. It's all custom designed. There are some rental units, refrigeration units that are out there that are being used in the area as well. And sometimes those meet the requirements you need, sometimes they don't. But we are seeing a bit of an increase in the use of rental refrigeration plants. And again, the design of the facility is very important. You can't just take a facility that was designed for the Bakken or West Texas and move it back here and expect it to work, because it was designed for different conditions. So it's very important that the design is done up front and you're able to understand the gas composition and what you want to extract as far as liquids. Economics depend on the BTU values of the gas itself and the hydrocarbon components. But the economics really look favorable for smaller, customized facilities that can handle smaller quantities of gas. And when I say smaller quantities, not like the 200 or 300 million a day facilities. We're talking about something in the 10 to 50 million a day facility. You're definitely economic extracting NGLs and trucking them to sites with those kind of numbers. And the last thing I had over here to the right was we had done some equivalent gas pricing based on selling the liquids. And what you can see there is we were looking at about $2.50 gas. And based on the forecast, if you sold the liquids on the model, you would raise that value of your gas to between $3.50 and $4 from the proceeds from the sale of the liquids. And that's all I had. This is a very small facility that was designed and built and put in Ohio. It's a small refrigeration plant designed for about 3 million a day. And so you can see it doesn't take a lot of room to put one of these facilities in. And that's all I had.
Okay, great, John. Thank you. So we obviously have some time here for questions. So I haven't seen anything coming on the chat quite yet, but is there anyone on the phone? Just unmute yourself and ask away. Sounds like some people are being shy here.
Hello.
We'll give it another minute and let you guys think about it.
Hello.
Yeah.
This is Jun Song in upstream development and engineering. What is this 3 million gas capacity plant cost, and then what is the return of investment?
I believe your question is, what's the cost of a 3 million a day plant?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, I think it's, you said
okay. So for about 3 million a day in gas, and you really probably shouldn't. You really shouldn't size these in gas volumes. It's more liquid, but for probably 3 million a day, and you're moving somewhere in the range of 300 to 500 barrels of liquids out of that plant, you're looking at roughly around $1 million to $1.5 million US to build that facility.
And then it's a return of investment is maybe it's 6 months or 1 year.
You're looking at about a year probably, yeah, before you have it built and installed. So you need to do the planning, especially if you're an operator, you need to do the planning really before you start drilling the wells. And it's nice in this area and other areas where you've got BTU values mapped out and gas compositions available from other partners or other operators. You can take that and do a preliminary design based on that.
Natural gas composition. Are there high CO2 natural gas in that area? So that is, you may need to remove CO2 before this refrigeration facility?
You would want to remove the CO2 before going into a refrigeration or a turbo expander facility, yes.
I mean, the natural gas from the Utica has the
high... is it high CO2? No, it's not high CO2.
Not high CO2.
It's not high CO2, it's low CO2.
Right.
Yes. CO2 is not a concern. Nitrogen is not a concern, and H2S is not a concern.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? It's kind of the downside of being the last speaker of the day, but
yeah,
everybody's ready to go, I think.
Yeah, some people have been sitting on here since 10 o'clock with, a couple bricks here.
Right.
But yeah, well.
So I guess the key thing I wanted to get across on this is, and the girl with Williams before me, I saw her presentation, and she talked about developing more infrastructure, and there's a need for that. This is a way to bring in smaller infrastructure to take liquids out of the higher BTU gas that we have in the areas of the Utica and the Marcellus without having to build a big major plant. And so it can be localized, it can be done locally, and it can be economic doing that. So I think that's the key piece I wanted to try and get across with this is there's lots of different sizes of gas conditioning plants. And essentially what these are small fractionation plants to take the liquids out. And that can be done, you know, even at the well site level.
Right, and they're skidded and modular, so pretty easy to plug and play and
Right.
and quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, the only problem is it's really hard to move them from one area to the other, and you know it's not as portable, just because there is some custom design of this. So, but that doesn't mean they can't be moved from site to site within a regional area. So, you know, they can be moved, you know, if economics dictate. But I think the key thing is if you've got 1,200 plus BTU gas, you should be looking at taking liquids out of it and what the economics look like to take your own liquids out.
Yep. Well, I appreciate your time, John, and you know, thanks for sticking through it and wrapping up our day. So